I was just talking to somebody, and they've heard some stories about the life that we led before the life that we're living, that being my kids and I. So over the weekend, my kids opened up about situations that they've lived in. And it's funny because it used to be really traumatic for them. And we're going on 3 years that their life has changed greatly. But they were talking about things that, looking back at it now, it's not that I'm embarrassed about it, but it's kind of like, let's not talk about it. We don't need to dwell on that, But the person that was listening was kind of blown away. And how could anyone make somebody else live like that? Or what's wrong with that person? Why would they do that? And I was just reminded, I don't think anyone's lived a life as hard as you. And it's ironic. And I had to make the comment back, yeah, you wouldn't know by the smile on my face or the sparkle in my eye. No, you really wouldn't. And that made me think, don't let your pain destroy you. A lot of times we feel like victims of circumstance rather than realize God's rejection. Let me rephrase this because I've heard it. Rejection is God's protection. And like I said before, I always saw it as I was a victim, that I deserved to be punished, that I needed these lessons, that harsh lessons, right? And at that time, it is the possibility I needed to learn because I wasn't taking the lesson and then going, okay, now I can grow from this as a person, because I was so stuck in a mindset that it's happening to me rather than, hey, let me get your attention. Let me remind you, you're better than this. You want more than this. Opening my eyes, right? And the one thing I didn't allow to happen was for my heart to become hardened and closed off, because I did empathize with my ex. I still to this day try not to tear him down. I try not to talk about him because it kind of sets us back in a way, because when we talk about him, all it does is bring back the trauma and the hardships. But there's not always the possibility that you can just delete something, your past, right? And I remember when I first came back, everyone was like, just stop talking about it. And I was like, my life? Because for 16 years, it was pain and violence and trauma and hardships. And it just, sometimes you got to talk about these things to get it out. And when it comes to dealing with other people that haven't lived through that, they don't know the experience, they don't want to hear it because it makes them uncomfortable, which makes recovering from abuse really difficult because everyone's closed off to it. And that's why I wrote a sci-fi book basically on domestic violence. That was the twist to it, to shed light to the public that, hey, it's a real thing. And in all honesty, none of us talk about it, because what are you going to walk up and go, hey, he's abusing me, happy Thanksgiving? You don't do it. And once you've been through it, you can actually look at somebody and tell what they're going through. And the telltale signs of someone being abused is they're going to walk with their head down. Their shoulders are going to be slumped. Their eyes are going to be kind of dull or just staring off. They follow quietly in a straight line. There's no life to them. And I didn't realize that until I went through that. And the hard part is you can't really call anybody out on it, because the person in the situation has to choose to get out of the situation and put themselves in a safe environment to be able to get away from that. And The hard part for me was I felt alone. I had not been in contact with my family for years, not to where I trusted them enough to go live with them. And then even when I found the courage to say, okay, I have a safe place to go live, it wasn't as safe as I thought it was. Because honestly, I went back to a situation where they didn't understand. They were tearing my kids and I both down in a way that it was basically the same manipulative tactics, but in a more loving manner. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but even being in that situation, I thought, what am I doing? I could have just stayed in the other relationship. But what happened was there was a push. There was a push to make me go, okay, now how are you going to get out of this situation? Because the extreme abuse had calmed down enough to allow me to think, to where I could get a little bit more sleep. Because sleep deprivation is a huge tactic of somebody who wants to manipulate you. And for years, I was deprived of sleep. And it made it hard to function. It made it hard to make a plan. It made life miserable, honestly. And like I said the other day, there was a lot of health issues that started popping up because of the abuse. So if you find yourself in a situation, I know it's really hard, and I'm not suggesting a shelter, because even with my son, he was bigger. He looked more mature, and I couldn't get into a shelter. And it was also at the beginning of COVID, so there was no shelter. And the one thing I had to do, I'll keep reminding you, was pray. And I remember I left and I ended up going to my parents' house knowing I couldn't stay there. And I had prayed, crossed my fingers, crossed my toes, my eyes, and my nose. And I was just like, it's going to all work out. Everything is working out for me. It always works out. Everything is working out for me. And I just kept repeating to myself. And I had decided, okay, we're going to go stay in this cheap hotel. And it was what I could afford. And it was funny, as soon as I pulled up, there was a now hiring sign. And I was like, what? This is serendipitous. This is meant to be. So I still had my job working online. And I was like, okay, at least I have something that will suffice. And I had a little bit of money in my account. And I sat there and I thought to apply for the job. But at that point, I was like, no, I'm too good for this. I was arrogant and started applying for other jobs that I thought were more up my alley, my skill sets. And things just didn't work out that way. I started having car problems. I started watching money just go, go, go. My online job was slowing down, so money wasn't coming in as much. And honestly, I was being forced to humble myself. I was being forced to say you're not above anything. So I got to a point where I had, I think, $5 in my account. And I was sitting outside of my room. I had gone to the cemetery and visited my grandparents. And when I had come back, I was at a point, it felt like my lowest point. And I was just like, it is what it is. I don't have much fight left in me anymore. I can't pay for my room anymore. We're about to be homeless, and I had talked to the kids and let them know we're about to be living in our car and having the kids that I am. Mama will do what we need to do to get by. And I went outside, sat down, and had my headphones on, listening to music and trying my best not to cry. And the owner of the motel walked up and said, hey, didn't you apply for a job? And I said, yeah. And he said, but you had an interview for another job. How did that go? And I said, I didn't get it. And he said, so were you still looking for a job? And I told him yes. we discussed my situation, and miracles, it popped in that day, right? So food was covered, shelter was covered, a new job was covered, and it felt like everything was starting to come into place. So I'm telling you this story to remind you, you might be at a breaking point, but don't give up. And keep knowing that it is what it is. Things will happen the way that they're supposed to happen. And honestly, had I not been at my lowest point, a breaking point to go, I surrender, I don't know what else to do. Had I kept pushing and pushing and pushing and fighting, I think that it would have destroyed me. And I honestly feel like we would have been homeless, because the lesson was to surrender, to trust in the divine, in a greater good, and know that I'm always protected. So I'm here to remind everybody else that when the going gets tough, put your hands up and surrender. Just give thanks and praise, because as much as you want to keep fighting and pushing and almost like wiggling around, right? You're caught in a trap. It's not going to do any good to fight it. You're not going to get out of that situation. But when you can step back and say, I don't always know what's best for me, but you know what's best for me. And I'm going to have faith, and I'm going to allow divine spirit to work in my life, to lead me and guide me into the path that I need to be, into the lives of the people I need to meet. You'll start seeing that things get, they open up, new pathways occur, more abundance begins to flow into your life. And the hard part is when this happens, not to get arrogant, not to ignore the fact that you're being blessed, because you can go from having nothing to having it all. And being a person that has come from nothing, and I didn't ever look at it like that until I was just told, man, you've had it rough. And I've always thought it is what it is. It seemed like it's the process I had to go through. And like I pointed out, that had I taken the easy path, I wouldn't know the hardships that a lot of us face on this planet. That when it comes to society, there's a scale, right? There's that low, middle, and upper. And the higher ones can't see what the lower ones go through. And the sad part is this lower portion is a bigger majority, right? So you have all these people struggling in silence. And I'm here to tell you, stop struggling in silence. Because one thing my grandmother taught me, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So when we begin to speak out about what's going on in our lives, it actually helps others to go, I'm not alone. And then this allows you to start coming back together to create a bigger voice that will allow you to speak, because when you are being silenced because you're less than what other people they think they are, they overlook you. And it gets to a point where you're struggling and suffering and you're left to do it on your own. But there's no need for it. And one thing I've told myself for probably a decade, speak up and speak out. And it's the same thing I tell my kids, speak up. If you have something that's weighing heavy on your heart, you have a right to be heard. And this is all of society. Every single one of you has a right to bring your quandaries, your problems to the table and to be heard. And that's what's called freedom of speech. And it's like we have been put into an illusion that we don't have the right to speak up because we hide our pain or we hide the truth of the way that we're living. And as hard as it is to talk about the way I've had to live, I see that it allows others to go, oh, wow, it could be worse, or oh, I'm not alone. And if all I can do is give that comfort that you're not alone and that you will make it through it, you will rise up, you will get out of it, I'm happy to share my story. You know, I'm happy to share the fact that I've had to live in the woods in a tent and use a shower bag to survive and get by, and live off of ramen noodle for as long as I could remember, or peanut butter and jelly, and just some days not even eating because there wasn't enough, because I always made sure that my babies came first. And it was hard at the time, and then it became easy. But at that same time, for it to become easy, I had to completely abandon myself. And that leads me back to, don't let your pain harden you, because it's easy to get hardened. You know, it's easy to feel like a victim of circumstance. But just understand, if you take on the victim mentality, then you're overlooking the blessings. You're missing the lesson. And there's great things that can come from humbling yourself and realizing that great things are in store for you, but not everything comes easy. So hopefully there was something in that could help somebody that needs it. If you're going through hard times, reach out. And you know what? I'm sending you love and light, and you're going to make it through it. I promise you. Keep your head up, smile, don't lose hope, and keeping on. And I hope you have a great Monday, and talk to you later. Bye-bye.